We're about to get started. We're about to get started. What a glorious morning.
Indeed.
This is the day that never mind, that was church, never mind. It is the last day of our budget hearings. Yeah. I would suggest that was worth a clap. No. Seriously grateful for all of our committee members for their dedication over the last 3 weeks of budget hearings, and to all of our staffs for all of their work to prepare the members for these budget hearings. To the staffs at all of the different agencies that have come before us, as well as the staff here in Harrisburg. We are going to begin our hearing with the Governor's Budget Office. But before we begin, Chairman Struzzi, any introductory comments?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Harris. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Secretary Reber. Welcome to your first budget hearing. We appreciate you being here. Obviously, we have a lot to cover today with the Governor's $53.2 billion spending proposal, $2.72 billion increase over the current budget, 5.4% increase. Obviously, we're concerned with the impacts on the rainy day fund, the proposed drawdown of about $4.5 billion, the depletion of our surplus, and a lot of other things that we covered over the past 3 weeks that ultimately lead to you. And so we will go ahead and get started and look forward to your answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, Secretary, if you could rise. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, so help you God? You may be seated. In the middle of the table is our timekeeper. Our members will have 5 minutes to ask questions. The light will turn green when they are able to start. At yellow, that means that there are 30 seconds left. And at red, that means time has expired. We'd ask that you wrap your answer so that we can get as many questions in as possible. Secretary, would you like to begin with an opening statement or go directly to questions?
Right to questions.
All right, let's do it. We'll begin with Representative Curry.
Morning.
Thank you for being here today. First question for you is about the budget impasse. The 2025-2026 budget was passed on November 12th, which means it was 4 months and 12 days late. During that time, school districts, child care centers, counties, and other partners missed critical payments. Have you been able to quantify the impact of the impasse in terms of missed payments or lost economic activity?
So when it comes to the impasse, there was about 106,000 payments that we had pre-audited and worked with the Treasury Department to be able to issue upon the actual enactment of the budget. But again, those 106,000 payments would have otherwise been released to those entities that you had mentioned, school districts, counties, and other entities if we would have had an on-time budget. The value of those payments was about $7.2 billion. Wow. So it was $7.2 billion and over 100,000 payments that were held.
Thank you for that information. And PA is constitutionally required to have a capital budget. What impact does a delayed capital budget have to your office's management of our capital programs?
So the capital budget is an important part of the overall strategy of providing services from the Commonwealth, and having a delayed capital budget vis-a-vis a delayed debt issuance bill, which we did ultimately get from the General Assembly in November as well. last year delays the ability for us to issue debt, which then is in turn used to continue to pay contractors on capital projects. How we typically would prefer to have the capital budget operate is a debt bill issued alongside the start of a fiscal year, ultimately giving the flexibility to the administration to issue bonds when market conditions are at the best opportunity. Thankfully, we did have a pretty successful bond sale, and we took some additional steps this year to try to drive down potential interest costs over the year by doing a multi-tranche approach and breaking the sale down into 3 separate bids. But having the ability to sell when we need to and not potentially slow down payments to manage cash is important.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Kale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Over the course of the last, really, year, 2 years, as we've been going through these hearings, a growing frustration within our caucus, and I think within this body, has been about the projections that the governor put out in his budget proposal. This year, the projections show a growth of about 0.78% in the budget for the next years, going from 28, 29, 29, and 30. And we've talked to multiple secretaries. We've talked to DHS, we've talked to PDE, and all of them tell us that if Medicaid costs continue the way that they're going, if we actually follow the Supreme Court with the adequacy, this is their words, not mine, the adequacy funding, you're talking hundreds of millions, billions of dollars more of spending. Yet our overall budget projection has us at 0.78%. Is that a realistic projection?
I think the projection follows a longstanding practice of showing what we are mandated to provide in costs. So that would be any kind of collective bargaining agreements that are officially in place, and we know for sure are happening, and other mandatory costs on things like correction spending and DHS spending. There is growth in our DHS projections, but I will also say that, as you know, there are potentially large impacts coming down from the passage of H.R. 1 at the federal level, and coupled with some of the other steps that Secretary Cush has taken to help manage costs in the DHS space, along with our proposal to increase the minimum wage and just the redeterminations, work requirements, and other things at the federal level. It is going to be a very difficult task in trying to accurately depict what we believe that the overall costs would be in that space.
So would you concede that 0.78% is not a good faith projection?
I think it is a projection based on the information that we have at this point. I will also say that we budget a year at a time. So the proposal that we had put before the General Assembly in February continued the investments that we believe are important to make in Pennsylvanians. And we also understand that the negotiation process is just that. It's a process, and we'll be back discussing every year on an annual basis with the General Assembly.
One of the most important things that we do within this legislative body is present a budget, vote on a budget, pass a budget, keep the Commonwealth going. Year after year, we're looking at things. It is critical for us to understand where the executive believes the expenses are going to be, not just this year, but in years going in future, so we can prepare. It's that way here, it's that way at business, it's that way for my constituents. We want to be able to plan and to plan effectively. But when we get bad faith numbers as it relates to projections, which is what this basically is, 0.78%, your own secretaries within the administration are telling us it's going to be more. And then when we ask them about the projections, you know what the response is? It's ask the budget secretary. It's ask the budget secretary is the response. I guess my question to you, are you familiar with what the spending is going to be in the Department of Education? And if you're not, why are you the one putting the projections in the Department of Education?
So we are projecting what the spending level for the Department of Education would be in the budget year in fiscal year 26. And again, we cannot speak to what the General Assembly will implement in fiscal years 27, 28, 29, or 30. However, we know that it's important to make the investments that we're proposing in 26 to keep us on a good projection in making investments in our children.
Yeah, well, just for the record here, I've been in office since 2019. And that year was a 5.3% increase to budget. The next year, 6.3%, 11.5%, 3.1% in 22-23, 5.8%, 23-24, 5.3%, 24-25, 25-26, 5.7% proposed this year, 5.4%. And then the next 4 years out of projections is 0.8%. How are these good faith projections? How can we plan for the future of this Commonwealth and be responsible with our constituents' tax dollars if we're not getting good numbers from the executive branch?
Again, the projections are based on what we know for sure we will be paying. And we come back every year with a new proposal based on where we believe the investment should be made. I believe that we'll be having the same conversation next year about what the investment should be in fiscal year 27.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to talk about K through 12 adequacy funding a little bit, right? In prior session, this legislature passed House Bill 2370, and it defined a 7-year timeline to close the adequacy gap. And I can tell you, for schools in my districts, it's been enormously impactful, powerful, particularly for our Norristown area schools that have been inadequately funded. We had at that time a $4.8 billion gap, a 7-year timeline, and over two budgets, we've paid that down about $1 billion, 20%. 5 years to go. As you know, the 5-year budget statement projects adequacy in out years in a flat mode. We've had a court ruling. We have a legislative bill for a 7-year timeline. I'd say the general consensus is we need to stay on a 7-year timeline. Can you talk to us about how do we project that? How do we stay on the path to closing that gap? And then as a follow-on, if you can speak economically, budget-wise, about the impacts that that's providing for Pennsylvania.
Yeah, sure. So as you had stated, we've started to address the adequacy gap. It was a bipartisan effort to create the adequacy formula. It was started at $526 million the first year that we had worked to address it, and it increased to $565 million last year. To the point that I had just tried to make, things change on a year-to-year basis. Yep. There was an agreement last year to increase the amount of dollars that go through the Ready to Learn block grant formula up to $565 million. We are again proposing, since that was the agreement with the General Assembly last year, to fund adequacy formula at $565 million again this year. And when the formula was created, the school code, it allocates dollars on an annual basis. So we are proposing the $565 for fiscal year 26, and we understand that there'll be future conversations with the General Assembly on what the future of that funding looks like. But we are committed to work towards the 7-year gap. As far as the impacts of adequacy, I've also heard from districts about the importance of the dollars, and do know that we're starting to get the reporting on what the districts are using those dollars for. I think 25% towards academic success, almost 20% for full-day pre-K, full-day kindergarten. So I think the dollars are being put to good use, and the governor has taken a all of the above approach on workforce development, and we've made investments in a bipartisan manner in several areas, including pre-K, our school-age children, and then adult workforce commitment. So I think it's all part of the broader workforce strategy to make sure that we're providing resources to schools so that our kids can adequately learn and become productive in the future workforce of Pennsylvania.
If I ask the question, maybe a little different angle, if we're committed to a 7-year timeline, how does that help you in your projections across the budget in total?
I think it helps us in building what we believe economic success could be for the future, which ultimately leads to revenue growth. And that, coupled with our changes that we've made in the overall business climate in Pennsylvania under this administration, working with the General Assembly with our permitting reform and continuing to cut business taxes, as well as putting more money back in Pennsylvanians' pockets through new programs like the Working Pennsylvanians Tax Credit. I think all of that goes into consideration in a bright future for the Commonwealth and allows us to continue to build on those investments, which is what this budget does.
That's my vision for this Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Mako.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. Real quick, I got a couple quick IT questions for you to help me understand what's going on. So this year is the second year in a row the governor's been requesting the new enhanced enterprise security. I think you got 10 million last year, look for another 10 this year, to strengthen and expand existing cybersecurity infrastructure. Can you just briefly touch on why you need that twice in a row and why we can't do that now with existing IT infrastructure?
Yeah, so as you've likely heard, there have been increased attempts in the cyber attack type of areas. So I think it's just important that we continue to build on the investment that we made last year with the $10 million. Also, there's election security dynamics as well that are very important with the Commonwealth. So I think we do provide we provide resources as part of the overall IT structure and build out the agencies, but this would be on top of that dedicated to infrastructure.
Gotcha. Real quick, can you touch on the differences between Code PA, OA's IT services, and then the enhanced enterprise? Just like a 10,000.
Enterprise security?
Enterprise security, yep. Yeah, just real quick.
Yeah, so the enterprise security is dollars that is used by OAIT to be able to provide security. OAIT does the main operations of the Commonwealth's IT infrastructure, and then Code PA is our in-house tech build, essentially. So Code PA was created by the governor to reduce our reliance on outside contractors for IT infrastructure, and so they've built platforms that would have otherwise been contracted out and not covered by OAIT.
Do you know roughly how much the Commonwealth were spending total on IT?
So the IT shared service billing model projection and proposal for 26-27 is $384 million. And that's what gets billed out to other agencies for enterprise-wide.
Yeah, okay, through like outside contracting and all that too?
It's not all outside contracting. It's in-house services provided by OAIT for agencies.
All right, cool. Next, going back to that enterprise system life cycle, we have that it's to support the required mitigation of technology platform and to end its supported life cycle. I feel like this is like the Katy Perry song. It's hot, then it's cold, it's yes, then it's no, it's in, then it's out. We, for fiscal 26-27, it was 31.3, and now it's back up to 100 million. Can you just help me out on that? I don't understand what's the shift and then the timelines. That was pretty good. You like that. I want my time back too, sir.
So the S4 project is the replacement of our SAP system. The SAP system is the backbone of Commonwealth operations. It's at its 20-year life cycle, and it will no longer be supported. So that is the reason for the upgrades and the new implementation. The money that has been allocated by the General Assembly to date has been a lot of the planning and prep work, and now we're getting into the actual build. So that's what the $60 million is used for here. We're hopeful to begin to go live in fiscal year 26, and it'll have enhanced reporting, which is beneficial to appropriations committees. The General Assembly, appropriations committees, and the Commonwealth all use that system as our financial reporting, but it's also the basis for our HR systems, procurement systems, all of our systems.
Gotcha. And then, so you said it's at the end of its 20-year life cycle. So rough guesstimate when you're planning to phase that out sometime in the next 27, 28 timeframe?
The existing one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it loses its support at the end of the calendar year. So.
Okay, got it. And then last but not least, just to follow up on my colleague, Josh Kale prior, Yeah. Talking to the DHS secretary, you know, she was kind of obtruse when we were asking her about budgeting. Obviously, we know the HR 1 thing's going into effect, but as state legislators here on the state level, not the federal level, trying to plan onto the out years, it's a problem. You know, that's 42% of our budget. It's increasing by minimum. I've been here 10 years. It's increased 5% each year. Do you think that your projections are going to cover the Medicaid increases at a minimum? Because she was saying that's like $200 million, and that's pretty close to over 1% of the projection.
Yeah, I think just based on the trends and again the changes that Secretary Akush has implemented in working with the MCOs to try to contain costs, along with the impacts that we will be expecting to the Medicaid population as a result of HR 1. I think it's a best estimate for a number at this time, and of course we'll review it. And again, we're talking about 28 implementation for HR 1, and you know, there's still time where Congress could make changes to that. So.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mako making a Katy Perry reference was not on my bingo card today. All right. On the edge. All right, Representative Young.
Good morning, and good morning, Budget Secretary Reber. My question is around missed opportunities and past revenue proposals. The 2026-2027 budget projects that there would be a shortfall of approximately $4.7 billion. The governor's budget proposes 4 revenue generators. 1, adult use cannabis. 2, closing the Delaware loophole. 3, skilled games tax. And 4, minimum wage increase to help address our budget needs. However, this is the governor's 4th budget proposal and has called for all of these in the past. Looking backwards, how different would our budget picture look today if the legislature had enacted these proposals when the governor first called for them?
I believe, based on our previous calculations and estimates on what those revenue proposals would have generated over the time from when we proposed it, it would be about $3 billion in additional revenue that we would be have realized and in the general fund.
So as I understand your answer, you said that if we would have enacted these proposals when the governor first called for them, we would have profited $3 billion to date.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, thank you for being with us. So as of the end of February, the Rainy Day Fund posted a balance of $7.63 billion, which could sustain the Commonwealth for about 56 days. And the Office of Government Finance, or Officers Association, actually recommends 60 days. So we have a little ways to go with building that balance. Before the Senate Appropriations Committee, you stated that if the governor's budget would be enacted and we used approximately $4.5 billion that would be needed to balance his spending proposal, you estimated that the operational abilities of the Rainy Day Fund would be down to just 23 days. So that is correct?
That is correct.
In addition to sustaining the operations of the Commonwealth, the healthy balance of the Rainy Day Fund has had an undeniable effect on our credit ratings. In fact, the governor himself has stated that, quote, reasonable fiscal management of taxpayer dollars led to those very credit upgrades. What are the financial benefits of the credit upgrades we received?
The credit upgrades that we've received has given confidence to purchases of our bonds. I talked a little bit about our strategies in issuing bonds in a previous question. The sale of those bonds with higher credit ratings leads to millions of dollars of interest saved over the life of those bonds. I would also say, just to go back to, if I can, to a previous point, the national average of rainy day fund coverage is about 46. and there are differing opinions on what a appropriate amount is. There are different organizations who say less than the 60, but the national average is around 46. And I will also say that other states who have had higher balances are in similar situations as the Commonwealth and are turning to those. So the amount of rainy day funds nationwide are beginning to dip as well.
So let me ask you this then. If we withdrew $4.5 billion, which is what the governor is proposing, how would that impact our ratings?
So we've had conversations with the rating agencies. Again, we just did a bond deal in January, and we've had conversations directly with all three of the rating agencies. They've all affirmed our previous rating upgrades. And we've heard from some rating agencies that there's differing opinions as well on how much should be in a rainy day fund versus actually going towards investments to help stimulate the economy. So I think it's all, it's more than just surplus that they look at. They look at overall stability, and at the end of the day, the Commonwealth always pays our bills on debt service and makes and completes the promises that we give to our bond holders. So I think that all gets taken into consideration.
But this budget would not make us stable, as you've implied. So you're saying that you don't think it would impact our ratings?
I think there's a broader conversation every year when they do affirmations on a variety of issues. That is one thing that is taken into consideration. But I also feel that we had proposed to use the rainy day fund in last year's budget proposal and ultimately did not use it. I understand we will have further conversations with the General Assembly on what a final enacted product looks like.
But we're also going to have increased interest rates with this budget and bond debt. Does that sound like fiscally responsible management of taxpayer dollars to you?
We will have additional bond debt because we have to fund our capital budget, but I'm not sure the reference to the increased interest rates.
Well, with some of the programs that are being introduced, they're obviously going to increase interest rates.
I mean, the interest rates on our debt are set specifically by the purchases of our bonds. And since we have a very competitive bond program, we've been able to keep interest rates down regardless of what our operating budget looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Waxman.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for being here with us. It's good to see you this morning. I have a couple questions. The first one, I just want to clarify from the previous round. When we're talking about the state's bond rating, which is the...
Representative, can you move the mic a little closer?
There?
There we go. Thank you.
I was saying great things, too. Thank you, Chairman.
It was another Katy Perry reference.
Okay. So I just quickly want to address the previous speaker's comments just around bond ratings. Is it just the rate, and the bond rating for folks following at home, it's how lenders determine the creditworthiness of the state of Pennsylvania, and it impacts the rate at which we can borrow money. Is that bond rating set just on the rainy day fund, or are there other factors as well, like, let's say, passing an on-time budget?
Yes, in our conversations with the rating agencies, as I had mentioned, there are a variety of factors that go into an affirmation or changes to the rating. On-time budgets, we've heard from them, and in their affirmation statements that they provided us, said that that bondholders also like to see stability in when they can expect payments or to show that the Commonwealth can operate efficiently. So that's a factor. Again, surplus amount, as well as just general approach and investments in the economy.
Right, and there are independent entities outside of state government that set those ratings and are looked to for that. So, okay, just shifting gears, I wanted to ask, recently the Commonwealth has made a fairly significant shift in how we fund arts organizations. We have had some pushback. We have a lot of arts and cultural organizations in my district. There's a lot of concern about some of the new policies, and I'm wondering, has the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts conducted any assessment of the fiscal needs of Pennsylvania's arts and cultural organizations? And if not, will the administration undertake such an assessment to inform funding decisions in the future?
I can't speak to the specific assessments that they may have made. I am aware of the policy change that you are referencing and understand the council has kind of pushed for a rebranding to make sure that we're taking an all all directions, fluid direction approach on arts and culture, and that with the overall goal to make sure that the dollars go as far as possible into arts projects. At the end of the day, I think it's I believe it was undertaken with a good stakeholder process, and the board unanimously voted on that. But I would have to inquire specifically about any kind of further assessments that were made.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage that. We have just an incredibly diverse, community here in Pennsylvania, in our arts and culture community, and there's just really, really important organizations that are struggling at this time because of federal cuts, and it's just very important that we make very deliberate decisions around, I think, funding for the arts, and I would just really urge the administration to look at that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to shift a little bit from the budget numbers and talk a little bit about permitting reform and dollars supporting that program. Last year in November 2025, the General Assembly, we passed Act 45, which was fantastic permitting reform. Two key elements within that. I mean, there are a number of parts, but the first was that publicly posted all permits within the department, and then the second was instituting a permit progress tracking system. So we know that OTO, the Office of Transformation and Opportunity, has primarily been responsible for collecting the data and creating the catalog, which is great. So now, where do we find the funding in this budget program moving forward to maintain that program? Where is it in the budget?
So OTO specifically is funded out of DCD's general government operations line, but we are also providing funding and proposed funding in this budget specifically for Code PA to help build out that online system for the various agencies.
Yes, and that's a different line item.
Yeah, Code PA appropriation, yes. Code PA has been funded in a variety of different ways over the last few years. There's been an actual appropriation from the General Assembly, and then there's been fiscal code language that utilizes existing dollars from other agencies to work on projects. We're proposing just to fund it all via the appropriation.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what we're trying to better understand. Not that I am oppositional at all to the ground that we're gaining, because we're doing good things, but so what will be the office, or who will be the office for this next step to develop the permit tracking system? Will that be OTO? Is it going to be Code PA?
It's Code PA in concert with OTO. We work collaboratively on the process.
Okay.
But the actual infrastructure for the online database is being developed by Code PA.
So the quantity of those funds, the dollars, where will we find those in the budget?
We are proposing $3.7 million built into the 26-27 appropriation for Code PA for the tracking database.
Okay, excellent. I really appreciate that. We're just trying to sort through, because there's a lot of new things, and I'm struggling to find where these programs all fit in and, who's driving them. Because then the governor mentioned a new plan in his budget, the grid, right? And that was this accelerated permit, the governor's responsible infrastructure development, which is interesting. He named it after himself. But is the OTO, the Office of Transportation and Opportunity, are they going to be the lead office with grid?
So the current process is OTO is very hands-on with existing projects. So they work very closely with across multiple agencies to ensure that that the government is working at the speed of business when it comes to permitting decisions on projects. So when it comes to grid, the governor's standards that he had outlined in his address relate to ensuring that development, specifically in the data center space, are meeting certain protections that we would like to see for the Commonwealth. And that is the use of local workforce for both the building and for the operation of those centers, ensuring environmental protection, transparency, so that the local stakeholders have an idea of the discussions and the talk of development. And then also, one of the most important, in my opinion, is bringing their own power for those to keep energy prices down and not push those costs off to the local consumers.
So
So
I'm with you on all those, and we want Pennsylvania contractors doing this work. We want new natural gas power plants are going to help reduce energy costs. So who is ultimately in charge? Because if the governor's office is using its own executive office funds or dollars twisting back and forth, and then the governor goes, like, we want these sustained accelerated permits to remain within DEP or DCED. So it's great that you brought up data centers, but so is the fast track process going to be under OT? Because something permanent needs to continue to drive this success.
Fast Track is a program operated by OTO, so they would continue to operate that. And it would just be making sure that those standards are being met before we provide Fast Track and/or other tax incentives that might be in place for those builds.
Mm-hmm. And then who, for the accelerated permitting, which we all want for these data centers to get to go, who trumps who? Because you have three agencies, somebody's got to be in charge.
I mean, the Fast Track process is managed by OTO, and OTO works in collaboration with DCD, DEP, and other agencies on permitting.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Bellman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. One major concern that I'm hearing from a lot of constituents is about affordability. They're complaining and rightly complaining about the price of gas, about the price of groceries, about inflation. So I wanted to see how does this budget address affordability for our constituents?
Yeah, so as the governor mentioned in his speech and is shown in the proposal, there are a variety of areas in which we're trying to make items or purchases more affordable for Pennsylvanians. In specific areas, we're talking about in the housing area, the governor signed an executive order asking for the administration to develop the first housing action plan, which was just released a few months ago. There are legislative and regulatory proposed other policy changes that would help with affordability in that space. But then also we had called for the creation of a critical infrastructure fund. What the purpose of that would be to add housing stock. I think simple supply and demand. The more that there is available, the more affordable prices could become. He's also called for a plan in the energy space as well, which would be working closely with the utility companies as well as the PUC, and understanding that there's in transparency areas there, but then also that critical infrastructure fund would be utilized to help potentially bring new energy to the market, as well as the lightning plan that the governor had called for last year has some changes in that as well to the EDGE tax credits, which would also benefit bringing additional energy to the grid. I think the budget also continues some of the other tax cuts that we have made for Pennsylvanians. We expanded the child dependent care tax credit under this administration and working with the General Assembly, as well as creating the new Working Pennsylvanians tax credit, which is putting money directly back in Pennsylvanians' pockets to help with controlling costs.
And can you talk a little bit also about the property tax rent rebate program?
Yep. So under this administration, the General Assembly had passed legislation to increase the eligibility for property tax rent rebate, and it is now tied to a inflationary index, so it will continue to grow as Social Security income or other income sources grow for our aging population, so that they don't income out of the program. We're estimating a little over $300 million in property tax rent rebate payments in fiscal year 26. The General Assembly in last year's budget had also made a change to the funding mechanism for that. While the operations are funded for the property tax rent rebate program are funded out of the lottery fund, the property tax relief fund actually pays for the program itself and the payments to seniors.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your work, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Mustello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Secretary. The OTO, as we heard a little bit about this morning, established via the executive order, like we talked about in 2023, to help cut through the red tape, bring agencies together, support PA business, and encourage other businesses to move to the Commonwealth. Then, again, in April 2023, the governor signed yet another executive order to formally establish Code PA, for the improvement of online and digital services within the Commonwealth, which you referred to earlier. In review of the budget materials, I'm trying to understand exactly where the OTO resides. Does the OTO receive funding through the line item appropriation for Code PA?
No. Code PA appropriation funds projects and operations of Code PA. They have personnel staff, the people who are actually doing the work. That is what Code PA is funded by. OTO, as I mentioned in a previous testifier, or questioner, is funded out of the DCD GGO.
It's out of the, which one?
Department of Community and Economic Development's GGO operation, line up appropriation.
Oh, okay, so OTO is out of DCED, and then Code PA is out of?
Code PA.
OP, okay. So then regard with the funding for the Code PA then, the governor first called for a $3.7 million increase in his executive budget, and then in materials that were provided to us, it was only $3 million. Can you help me understand the difference in what the governor's official ask is?
3.7 million is the dedicated amount towards the actual tracking program that we were discussing. The actual appropriation for Code PA is increasing by just over 3 million. So we anticipate utilizing some of the existing funds just based on savings for other operations, personnel costs, et cetera, and still have some of the funds that were previously appropriated, both in the appropriation as well as the transfer that I'd mentioned from other agency funds.
Okay, so you mentioned DEP uses GGO funding, like you said, for permit catalog, but OTO is where the infrastructure is managed. Where's the fiscal responsibility in the budget? Where's this being tracked in the budget proposal? Seems like the governor created this executive order that made his own agency within Code PA with his OTO. So it's kind of an agency with an agency, it sounds like, right? I mean.
So OTO and Code PA work collaboratively across the enterprise. So they work with multiple agencies. The actual permanent review, as well as the economic development engine and strategies, are managed by the existing agencies. So DCD continues to be the main economic development agency for the Commonwealth and works closely and collaboratively with OTO. And OAIT still manages the overall infrastructure. Code PA is building new online platforms that would have otherwise in previous years been contracted out and saving money there, and DEP still manages the actual permitting process.
Then where's the fiscal responsibility then for this? Who's going to oversee to make sure?
I don't understand your question. So the budget appropriates dollars, and the normal
Right,
fiscal oversight of dollars resides with the budget office, comptroller's office, and then eventually with Treasury.
Okay, so that's where the responsibility is going to lie then?
Yeah, it's all general fund appropriations are treated the same. We have the same process for everything with oversight, and DEP dollars, the operations of OTO, and the projects overseen by Code PA all follow the same process.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Fleming.
Good morning, Secretary. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My colleague from the first-class city, Philadelphia, touched on something that I want to expand upon, which was affordability. All of us who are trying to get reelected just engaged in a process of speaking to voters, trying to get petition signatures, and one of the things that I heard about most was affordability, in fact, how it's harder to afford energy, groceries, et cetera. And for the constituents here in the district that I represent, one of the biggest constituencies there is our pre-Act 9 retirees. And the fact that when they retired, there had been cost of living adjustments that were provided to prior retirees every 5 to 6 years or so. And for some inexplicable reason, about 23 years ago, that stopped. That came to an end. And so I want to thank the good gentleman, Representative Malagary. He's the prime sponsor of a bill, along with Representative Deasy, House Bill 411, that we passed about a year ago, last April, with bipartisan support to provide a cost of living adjustment to pre-Act 9 retirees. So my question for you, Secretary, is what does that look like? If we're able to achieve this legislatively, given the parameters, and what does that look like from a budgetary standpoint, and how do we have to build that in our budget should that come to pass?
Yep, so our budget, I'll back up a little bit. Our budget allocates the state share employer contribution for SERS, as well as state share contribution for the PSER system. And the budget that we had proposed funds it at the actuarially recommended rate for the current system. We made good strides in ensuring that we're meeting our actuarial duty in those systems, and we've gotten our funded liability in those systems up over the last 10 years. Specifically to Pre-Act 9 COLA, I think the fiscal note, at least that I've seen, would increase the needs in those funds across both of them by about 170-ish million a year. And I think it would just be important that we're in direct communication with both the systems on what the impacts to the funded liability would be and the changes that would need to be there, and then ultimately what this body and the Senate provide in additional appropriations to cover any of those costs.
Well, I think it's an exceptional investment, and I just want to leave on this point. When we debate this issue and we talk about the deficit of the system, first of all, that bill will never come due all at once, right? Pensions aren't built that way. And the second thing is, the only reason why there are deficits in the system to the extent that they are is because the Commonwealth didn't uphold its end of the bargain to fund it under prior administrations. And so the workers, the retirees, they did their part each and every day, or each and every week or 2 weeks. The recommended amount was taken out of their paycheck, so they funded it. They upheld their end of the bargain. We need to work on their behalf and do the same. So, and make this a priority. So, thank you so much, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Representative DeVanzo.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here today. Mr. Secretary, the governor is proposing a critical infrastructure investment program that would issue $250 million over 4 years. The total would be $1 billion. Yet the budget provides very little detail about which agency will administer the program and how these funds will actually be distributed. At the same time, Governor Shapiro's Housing Action Plan, announced in February, proposes a housing-ready community design that would prioritize state funding for municipalities that adopt certain zoning and permitting reforms. Now, what I find interesting is the governor has been very critical of President Trump in attempting to condition federal funds to adapt certain policies. Yet it appears the Commonwealth is doing the very same thing, using taxpayer dollars as leverage to pressure local governments into adapting the administration's preferred zoning policies. So my question is for you, districts like mine who are 80-20, 80% farmland, 20% a downtown area, who have ordinances already in place designated to protect our farmlands, and it's just to protect the character of what we have, will these communities be left out of this action plan, the Housing Action Plan?
So the Housing Action Plan, was developed with thousands of stakeholder input over many roundtables, and the recommendations that came out of that were a direct result of those conversations. The specific changes as it relates to ordinances, I think would also fall under changes that we're proposing to the Municipal Planning Code, which is obviously a enacted statute by the General Assembly and would require those changes. So I think the normal legislative process that would have buy-in from a variety of stakeholders into any of those changes would be important. And I think that would be an opportunity to ensure that the constituent that you represent have some buy-in to the process.
But I don't think you answered the question. If a community, and we all believe in local support, if a local municipality does not adopt to the housing plan, and I got it right here, modernization of zoning to create incentives for pro-housing communities. It's in his action plans. If my communities do not adapt to that, will they be left out?
I think the actual ordinances, would be up to under the designation that you're speaking to, apologies, I was talking about the municipal planning code, but under the designation that you're speaking to, I think, it's part of a broader strategy to ensure that access to housing is available. And I think, certainly the details around what the designation would look like, I think, are still in discussion, and I think there's opportunity to kind of shape what the ultimate designation looks like. But I think on the face, the whole point of the Housing Action Plan was to ensure that we had stakeholder buy-in on what the future of housing looks like and the needs for communities, but also for businesses as it relates to making sure that we have workers and an ability to attract workers to different areas. So I think it's an across-the-board approach that we're looking to take on all things housing that ultimately benefits everybody.
I would agree with you on the whole purpose of it, because as we know, we need affordable housing across this Commonwealth. And finally, I'm going to wrap up with this, but if we don't know the details, we don't know which communities are going to be left out, which ones are going to be able to take advantage of this, is it fair to put $1 billion price tag over 4 years over taxpayers in these communities who may not even be able to opt into this program?
I view those two things as, while they can move on concurrent paths, I don't view those two as specifically needing to do one to get the other. The vision for the Critical Infrastructure Fund is to develop additional housing. And to your question about where that would live, we've proposed for the program itself to live in the Office of the Budget and work in a similar capacity as the current RCAP program, which is also run by the Office of the Budget. It would generate interest in programs, or it would generate interest in a variety of areas, including energy and housing development, and the merits of those projects would be what would dictate where the dollars go.
Yeah, I just take your answers for the fact that you didn't exactly answer, but that our communities, I'm assuming, will be left out of it. But it's something that I look forward to working you guys with to make sure that we are definitely incorporated in it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. How are you today? Last year, the governor's executive budget proposed dropping the Pennsylvania State Police reliance on the motor fund from $250 to $200 million with a continued year-over-year drawdown. In the enacted budget, it remained at $250. Is there no such proposal in this proposed budget this year? Do you think $250 million is a reasonable amount for PSP to draw from the motor fund?
So you are correct. We did propose a step-down rate of reliance on the motor license fund in last year's proposal, and ultimately, in negotiations with the General Assembly and the fiscal position of the general fund, it was decided not to enact that step-down. We have not proposed that step-down. The whole reason for the step-down that we were proposing and we were on that path was to provide additional dollars for road and bridge projects, as well as match federal dollars that we were receiving. We believe the proposal that we had put forward does allow us to meet our match obligations for federal funding. And to date, just as a result of those actions, we have freed up about $625 million for additional road and bridge projects. And even at current law, it would free up over the next 5 years a total of $2 billion extra for road and bridge projects.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is the second year you've proposed creation of a new appropriation under the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime, Delinquency, County Appropriation, Reentry Services. The appropriation would consolidate multiple county-based funding streams for parole, adult probation, reentry, jail-based medication treatments. Can you elaborate on why this consolidation is so beneficial?
Yeah, so this was actually part of our first year in REMAP when we had worked specifically with PCCD and DCED and the Department of Corrections with the whole intent of making sure that the dollars that we're providing, that the General Assembly appropriates, that gets used by communities, is being utilized as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I think in conversations with PCCD, we had noticed that there were certain restrictions on each of the two programs, and it was just more beneficial to the communities, the counties, and other entities that utilize these dollars to have more flexibility. So that's what the thought process was behind it. It would be treated more like a block grant rather than one specific funding stream for one specific purpose and another funding stream for a different purpose, combining them and giving ultimate flexibility to the locals.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Secretary Reber. Secretary Reber, not a single utility-scale nat gas project has been started in Pennsylvania since Governor Wolf, pushed us into the Regional Green Gas Initiative in 2019. 22 states, including Ohio and West Virginia, had natural gas power plants under construction in various development as of spring of this past year. Interestingly, there were no sites planned for any of the 11 states that were participating in RGGI. Energy is the backbone of our economy. I think energy is the backbone of any economy. From our direct development of our state's abundant natural resources to the affordable energy required to keep our manufacturing sector competitive and demanded by our constituents. It's undeniable, strong energy economy depends on a strong energy sector. This past year, amendments in the fiscal code officially ended Pennsylvania's participation in RGGI. I believe that's a very good thing. What are the prospects for enhanced energy investment across Pennsylvania in the coming years, and how would these investments impact the economic outlook here in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, so to your point, energy is a backbone of the economy. We have, to your point, cleared an obstacle that the General Assembly had viewed as an obstacle to energy growth in the Commonwealth. The governor has put forward his plan last year on potential ways to attract new energy. I referenced one of those, and that was changes to the EDGE tax credit, which would open up some additional incentives to bringing new energy to the grid. And the critical infrastructure funds that we had just spoken to about would also provide some additional potential resources to large-scale projects to bring additional energy to the grid. I think overall, the governor's stance on energy is all of the above types of energy. He had, as part of the Lightning Plan, had proposed differing changes to the AEPS to coordinate energy types. And I think his stance on permitting as well, in concert with the General Assembly and making changes to our permitting process, I think all open us up to additional investments in the future. And I would just also say that the steps that we've taken, not just in the permitting space, but just in the overall business climate, in reducing our corporate net income taxes and bringing businesses here, which then ultimately those businesses need energy. It all kind of plays together and is all part of the overall economic development strategy of the Commonwealth.
Well, the corporate net income taxes are still only going to get us to 4%, right? At
4.99, yeah. 2031.
31, right? Yes. So that's still far when Ohio's already at 0. But let me just, because your resume is very impressive. And simply hailing from Schuylkill County puts you on a higher plateau. We know that already, as does Representative Brennan. But you've got a strong background in economic development and fiscal responsibility. Let me just ask you a question, Secretary. If you were the CFO of a coal-fired power plant, and let's just say it's 2019, just or 2020, right after Governor Wolf had entered us into the RGGI, and understanding that power plants, there's a lot of moving parts, right? Would you recommend to your board of directors, your president, as CFO, to reinvest in that power plant, to keep it going, with RGGI looming over your head?
So I think on that question, I would just say I think we're in a position now where that policy is no longer in place. And I think it's important that we move forward from where we are. And the policies that we've enacted and the path that we're on with our economic development strategy are good things to recommend to CEOs for investments, and it's working, as you're seeing in other areas, like the Eli Lilly announcement, J&J announcement, some of those other big developments that are occurring because of the path that we're now on.
Well, and our time's up, and thank you, Chairman. But I will say that my concern in the governor's lightning plan, which you referenced, is the Pennsylvania climate emissions reduction, which does include a cap and investment program on and to regulate carbon emissions. So that is a concern, although not part of the budget. So just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Reber.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Malagari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time. We heard from my colleague, Representative Fleming, with regard to the Pre-Act 9 COLAs, SERS and PSERS COLAs. So that would be House Bill 411 of 2025. It passed with a bipartisan vote. It ranged from a 15% to a 24.5% cost of living adjustment over a time frame from retirees that's retired from July of 2000 to before July of 1982. That would be that class of individuals, over 25 years that they've been retired for some of them. Additionally, our municipal police and firefighters also need a cost of living adjustment. And they have a proposal, which I'm authoring, House Bill 1289, providing an special ad hoc COLA for them. That's ranging from a 10 to 20-year post-retirement timeline for those individuals. What in this budget could be utilized in a revenue sense to get us to our goal of helping our Pre-Act 9 retirees and our municipal police and firefighters get what they want?
So I believe, and I think the fire pensions and other municipal pensions are funded out of insurance proceeds currently. So I think, just based on the intricacies of that funding source, I think we would have to look at what changes to the existing, I think their floors and percentage bases. So we would have to look at the revenue streams coming in from those insurance proceeds, but then, also we've proposed new revenues just on from a general fund side. So I think, there are opportunities just across the board on new revenues, specifically the ones that we had proposed that we think are some common sense policies for potential future investments. Obviously, we had proposed what those investments could look like and where they go, but as I said before, it's a negotiation process with the General Assemblies on shared priorities on what ultimately makes it into a final enacted product. As I had mentioned to Rep. Fleming, I think just making sure that we're working with all of the systems to ensure any changes enacted by the General Assembly, we are meeting our responsibilities to ensure that those dollars remain there and available to the people who depend on them.
I appreciate that. So if we were able to exercise some of those options of revenue streams coming in and also changes within our budget structure, we might be able to get to that goal of what they're looking for?
I think it's an ongoing conversation with the General Assembly on what the dedication of resources would look like to any priority.
I appreciate that. Look, I understand that you really can't get what you want all the time, and our Commonwealth's retirees, they've been asking for over 20 years now. But I also understand that if you do try sometimes, which we've been doing, you might find that you get what you need. And our Commonwealth's retired state workers, educators, support professionals, municipal police and firefighters should also get what they need. So I thank you for your time, thank you for your testimony, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Reichert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. I want to start off with sort of an airing of grievances, and it's not with you, it's with some of your colleagues from some of the conversations we've had. You know, over the past couple weeks for these budget hearings, we had Secretary Carroll here, and when we were talking about some issues that I'm seeing with folks in my district, women in particular, who are applying for real IDs and getting the runaround, you know, with their marriage license and demonstrating name changes, but meanwhile they're getting passports with much easier processes. And showing this interaction I had with Secretary Carroll to, you know, some women in my life, they were just dumbfounded that there was no ownership of the issue, that there was no plan to do better, that, you know, the reaction from the Secretary was that PennDOT is in peak form and there's no need to do better. Secretary Arkush, DHS, was talking about the fact that due to H.R. 1, there's the potential for folks to lose SNAP benefits. But when pressed, she was saying that most people are meeting the community engagement requirements, but it's an issue with paperwork, how her department interfaces with these people. And you know, in particular, their forms. I mean, it said to mail or fax. And here we are 7 months after H.R. 1 has been signed into law, and we don't even have an email address. I mean, I you know, don't have a fax machine, but I have a phone that I can snap a picture and email that information in, you know, anywhere else. You know, when we look at the private sector, we look at businesses that have to adapt and make it easier for them to interface with the folks that they serve. What do we have in this budget, that the governor's proposal, to create these efficiencies or to better interact with the people that we all represent? What is in there to reduce the bureaucracy, to find these efficiencies, and to make government actually work and be responsive for people?
Yeah, I think a good example is Code PA, which we've talked about before. The whole idea behind Code PA was you know, developing systems that are beneficial to the residents of the Commonwealth to better interact with their government.
Well, through the website, through online, that doesn't eliminate the bureaucracy or reform the bureaucracy. It just makes the bureaucracy somewhat more accessible online. It doesn't change the fact that, you know, a person can't email in these forms to certain agencies. It doesn't change the fact that, you know, PennDOT doesn't want to explore different ways that, you know, they don't want to talk to, you know, U.S. Department of State and how they process marriage license. Code PA just improves the online experience, but it doesn't do anything to fix the bureaucratic red tape that a lot of people are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. What is the governor proposing to eliminate red tape that we see for average people? And again, we get all the permitting reform and everything for businesses, but what's he doing for the actual average person?
I mean, Code PA can be utilized for those things, and they are working on additional projects than just a permitting tracker. They can build and have developed forms for agencies. I can't speak to a specific program or form because everything is dictated in a different manner. Some have federal requirements if it's a federal program that certain hard copies be retained or provided. I will also say, though, in my time in the various agencies that I've served, there have been process improvement projects. There have been cutting down on the need for physical copies of applications. I can speak specifically to the RCAP process and say that we've gotten rid of the need for a very laborious submission for formal applications for the project. We've gone from a 23-tab application to a 10-tab application, so we've cut out information that we otherwise weren't utilizing. So we are constantly, as an administration, looking at process improvement. You know, I always welcome conversations around what that looks like, and I'd be happy to have those conversations directly with you.
Well, good, and I look forward to that because, I mean, again, the reaction that we are getting from the secretaries is that, well, these things are set in stone, and, you know, even though, again, I've had a number of women come into my office, just, you know, a couple in tears with the runaround they're getting from PennDOT, and the reaction from the secretary is that there's nothing to see here. Just with my last couple seconds, I just wanted to touch on the governor's office itself and the appropriation there for its increased over 75% since the governor has taken office, from $6.9 million to over $12 million in this proposal. But in the out years, you know, as a lot of people were talking earlier, it's 0%. There's a 0% increase booked. So does that mean that the governor's not looking, or he's not going to be coming back to us next year asking for raises for employees, adding new people, their COLA or anything for himself?
Again, we budget projections on personnel costs based on in-place collective bargaining agreements and actual costs that we know are going to occur, and that is for various reasons. One being to maintain our position in those negotiations and not setting specific expectations.
But even the COLA itself is by statute. I mean, that we know that that's going to occur, but it's not reflected in this budget ask and the budget projections.
And we do work across all agencies to make sure that we're trying to keep our personnel costs in check, and believe that we've made good strides in going from at least what we've proposed in previous years in those appropriations down to a lower increase. So, we will continue to work towards that.
I look forward to a 0% budget next year. Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Reber, for your time this morning. Secretary Reber, you're the architect of this budget, so I want to be direct. I've sat through weeks of these hearings, and quite frankly, I've noticed a pattern. My friends on the other side of the aisle, they love to rail against big government. They love to call this budget and others bloated. They love to talk about fiscal responsibility. One of them a couple years ago took a flamethrower to the budget number on camera. Real subtle. But then I hear these same members sit in this room asking these secretaries why government isn't doing enough to help their communities. Why government isn't doing enough to stop hospital closures in their rural communities. Why government isn't helping state police coverage helping them delays in their communities, in communities that don't even pay for their coverage to begin with. Why government isn't doing enough to help their schools get enough funding. And you see, to me, Mr. Secretary, it's talking out of two sides of your face. It's like we're demanding services and then refusing to pay for them. That's not fiscal conservatism. That's really, quite frankly, that's dishonesty. Because we know that 80% of our budget is education and human services. That's Medicaid for our grandmothers. That's food for our food banks. That's funding for our kids' schools. That's keeping hospitals open in your rural communities. So if you don't like aspects of this budget and you want to cut certain aspects of this budget, then tell us what exactly you want to cut. Tell your communities and tell this body what schools you want to cut. Tell this community and tell this body what hospitals you want to cut in your communities. Tell this community and tell this body what funding you want to cut. Meanwhile, the federal government is making life incredibly more difficult for us. 144,000 Pennsylvanians losing food assistance, 104,000 losing health care. And Washington's pushing $87 million more dollars in funding to the state. So, in my opinion, this is not a time to play games with numbers. This is the time, quite frankly, to keep the lights on. And so, Secretary Reber, I have just a couple of very simple questions. If this budget doesn't pass with the revenue increases that the governor is asking for, where do the cuts come from, and who pays the price?
So if the revenue proposals that we had proposed are not enacted, then we collectively as the General Assembly and the administration during negotiations have difficult decisions that would need to be made. And I think, unfortunately, those who are hurt are everyone who relies on those dollars, the constituencies that you would reference, the schools, the county governments, nonprofits, businesses. I'm happy with the progress that we've collectively made as an administration in working with the General Assembly on the investments in each of those areas, and believe that we're seeing those pay off. Pennsylvania is attractive to businesses, and we want to make sure that people want to move here, stay here, build a career here, build lives here. So I think it's very important that we continue to make those investments, which is why we had proposed the revenue sources that we had proposed.
So if we don't pass those revenue sources, we got to come up with either $4 to $6 billion worth of cuts. And so if we were to freeze and/or cut every agency outside of education and/or human services, state police, PennDOT, corrections, agriculture, DEP, all of them, would that get us halfway to closing that deficit, Mr. Secretary?
As you had mentioned, most of the appropriations of the general fund are to education and human services. So collectively, the appropriations outside of those agencies would be small. I think there would still have to be some reliance on the existing surplus.
So again, that's cutting education and human services. That's cutting schools, that's cutting hospitals, that's cutting Medicaid, that's cutting food assistance. And so when you have politicians who talk about fat being cut from this budget, I'm asking, where is that fat? Because all I see is bone. Again, House Democrats, along with this governor, we have done our job, in my opinion. We've passed multiple revenue solutions, whether it's cannabis reform, whether it's raising the minimum wage, whether it's skill games, closing the Delaware loophole, you name it, we've done it. And Senate Republicans have yet to do their job, and they've blocked every single one. You see, politicians in this building, they love to hate big government until they need it, Mr. Secretary. They demand hospital funding, they demand state police coverage, they demand school funding in their district, but then vote against it in the budget that pays for all of it. Again, that's not fiscal conservatism. That's talking out of two sides of your face. And so again, in this budget in June, it's going to be time to either put up or shut up. You're either going to cut schools in your community, you're either going to cut hospitals in your community, or you're going to help us pass this budget. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add to that, please? So I would also just like to add that as an administration, I referenced it a little bit earlier, we have taken steps to try to minimize our spend and maximize our efficiencies. So through the remap process, we have tried to pair our actual utilization of our correctional institutions to what our actual prison population is, to try to cut down on over appropriations or driving additional costs. And we've also undertaken as an administration the SOUP initiative, which takes the same concept, making sure that our actual footprint and our lease costs and our overall building costs are in line with what our actual employment and workforce needs are. So I think we've done what we can, and through the negotiation process, we've certainly made agencies kind of tighten up their bootstraps as well. So just look forward to continuing to work with the General Assembly on all those.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Rigby.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. Good morning, Secretary. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to talk about the voter registration and education appropriations for the fiscal year 26-27. The Department of State requested $598,000 for this appropriation in its budget submission to your office in October. However, the governor's added an additional $1.4 million to this line, proposing a total of $2 million for the voter registration and education, a 250% increase from the current year. The Department of State testified last week that the new funding would be used for additional outreach, but could not give specific examples about how this money would be spent. The last time this appropriation was increased anywhere near this magnitude of $2 million was all the way back in fiscal year 2013 and 14, after the voter ID law was supposed to be implemented. Obviously, the governor's up for re-election. Why is this funding necessary now, and do you feel that this funding, if enacted, would also present a conflict of interest for the governor in running for his re-election? And again, since no new voter initiatives have been enacted since 2013 or 14, the reasoning for this increase?
So the historical practice in budget proposals, at least under this administration, has been to increase resources during the even year election cycles. I don't believe it would be a conflict because we don't tell people how to vote. We tell people the importance of voting and the methods and timelines around voting. So I don't believe there's a conflict just because he is on the ballot for re-election this year. But again, in historical practice, we have increased, and if you go back to our 2024 budget proposal, we had proposed increases in the even year, out year fiscal years, and it is for that purpose. We know that there's better turnout, there's more interest in voting, so just making sure that people know how to vote, what methods are available is important.
I mean, when I look at the numbers from 2013-14 up to 2025-26, we went from 458,000 to 591,000, 113,000 over that 12-year period. And now we go to $1.5 million up to $2 million now on this proposal. It just seems like, do we know where these monies are going to be appropriated? Is it going to any certain counties, or do we know how it's going to be dispersed, or can we find out where and how it's being dispersed?
Sure, I'm happy to work with the Department of State to get information on what their intended utilization of those dollars would be. I don't, I do not, I leave election matters to the Department of State. They operate the Bureau of Elections and have the responsibility of ensuring fair, safe elections across the Commonwealth. But I'd be happy to talk with the Secretary and come back with a proposed plan for those dollars.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Kincaid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, earlier in our hearings, the Attorney General testified that he left up to the governor's office the lawsuits against the federal government when it overreaches its authority and denies resources that are rightfully designated to the people of Pennsylvania. To date, the governor has joined 20 lawsuits to that effect, and all of the cases that have been resolved to this point have been resolved to the favor of the people of Pennsylvania. How much money has the governor's office had to expend on those cases?
I don't have a specific amount of time. I can say that it was all done in-house. There was no outside counsel for any of those suits. So it would have all been borne by the existing resources available to Office of General Counsel.
So the Attorney General said that part of his decision-making was if you choose to take one case, you have to choose to leave another one. Is that something that is happening as a result of needing to take on these cases?
You mean specifically non-federal government-related cases?
Correct.
That our
Yeah.
attorneys... I mean, we have a finite amount of attorneys internally, and we have made it a practice to not use outside counsel. So in theory, we do try to make sure that we're providing all of the services that the agencies need through our Office of General Counsel. But obviously, their time could otherwise be dedicated to other services.
Thank you. Do you think it would be appropriate to reallocate funding from the Attorney General's office in order to ensure that there are sufficient resources and potentially attorneys to be able to address these cases if the Attorney General is unwilling to take on these cases?
I think ultimately that is a decision of the appropriators in the General Assembly on what a final product looks like. We obviously work closely with the Attorney General on a variety of instances and have had a good working relationship. But, we could always use additional resources. We try to budget accordingly and appropriately. But, that's ultimately a decision of the General Assembly and appropriation process.
Thank you. I want to turn to farmland preservation. We have a really robust farmland preservation program in Pennsylvania. It's been really effective at preserving farmland all across the Commonwealth, but it isn't accessible to urban farmers, and protecting urban farmland because it doesn't meet those kind of small patches of land don't necessarily meet the definitions. And I wonder if you could speak to the importance of Pennsylvania's agricultural conservation easement purchase program and enabling farmland to stay farmland, and also how we might make that accessible to more urban farmers and smaller farmers.
Yeah, so as a farmer myself, I absolutely see value in agricultural industry in Pennsylvania. The ag preservation program is critically important to ensure that farmland remains farmland for future generations. The ag industry is it kind of teeters back and forth between tourism and agriculture, the biggest industry in Pennsylvania. Obviously, we have our founding on agriculture. And Secretary Redding has been a vocal proponent of urban agriculture and expanding agricultural opportunities into urban settings. We've had urban agricultural type grants as a result of funding that has been appropriated by the General Assembly in concert with the Farm Bill. And I think, open to further conversations on what the status and the future of the ag preservation program looks like. I do know that, there is certainly way more demand than there are resources available. I think the funding for that comes from cigarette tax transfers, I believe, at the moment. So I think, any conversations around expansion of that program would be beneficial to the Commonwealth.
Do you think that in the governor's budget, he's proposed, once again, legalizing cannabis? Do you think that that would be an additional revenue source that we could use to preserve farmland?
Yeah, and again, we've proposed revenue sources that ultimately we believe are common sense policies, and the use of those revenues are up to negotiations and conversation of shared priorities with the General Assembly. I will say from an agricultural standpoint, we view adult use cannabis as a new potential crop and growth opportunity for our farming community. And I think just given the current situation with tariffs and otherwise impacts on our farming community, having the ability to diversify crops and enter new markets is going to be important. So that is why we actually propose to put it in the Department of Agriculture, because we believe it is a future agricultural commodity and opportunity for our farming community.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Alsamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to have you here this morning, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, as part of the proposed tax and revenue modifications for the upcoming fiscal year, the governor is proposing the repurposing, reform, and modification of several tax credit programs, including one that I'm very passionate about, the Education Improvement Tax Credit. As you know, this tax credit provides tremendous benefits for parents and students seeking additional options to best suit their academic needs. On page C1-7 in the executive budget, the governor proposes to reallocate caps within the program to provide more tax credits to education improvement organizations. The overall cap for the EITC program is proposed to remain unchanged. Can you please elaborate on what specifically the governor is proposing in terms of reallocating the caps within the program?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we have taken a very detailed approach in things like REMAP and looking at all of our existing programs within agencies and making sure that the dollars that are made available by the General Assembly are being put to their intended purpose and being fully utilized. That's why in some of the other ones that I've talked about with EDGE, those are unutilized. We're talking about making changes to actually utilize them. In the case of the Education Improvement Tax Credit, as you note, there are 4 programs underneath that umbrella: economically disadvantaged schools, the EIO, pre-K, and K-12 scholarships. Out of those 4, the only one that has been fully utilized up to its actual cap underneath the school code legislation is the EIO program. Overall, in fiscal year 24, there was about $103 million of the allocated resources that went unused, and we believe that there's opportunity to readjust the caps to make sure that the programs are being fully utilized, and that's what we're proposing.
While I understand that some of the credits were underutilized in prior years, the numbers show that it was just a matter of time between the expansion of the credit and the donors catching up to utilize it. Considering that the current budget, which contained a $50 million increase for scholarships to children in the economically disadvantaged schools, was only passed 4 months ago, it is noteworthy that EITC credits are already over 88% utilized. This number would be higher if not for the $50 million expansion. Yet, as of the beginning of February, the current utilization of these credits already exceeds last year's cap. While I understand that the EIOs are popular, their expansion should not come at the expense of scholarship credits that many of us have fought so hard to create for Pennsylvania students so that they can benefit to choose the school of their choice. Is there a draft language currently available for us to review?
It would simply be changes to the existing caps in the school code, so I can provide that.
Just a quick follow-up on the school students, the scholarships. Do you have any data that shows the number of students that proportionately are urban to rural, or how those scholarships are divided out by any chance?
It has been a long-standing impedance on the administration to be able to collect data as it relates to those programs. There is specific information that has been allowed to be collected, and no other information was allowed by law. I do know that I believe, the school code in 2024, there were some changes to reporting, so I can check in with the Department of Community and Economic Development to see if that is something that we're allowed to collect.
Yeah, if you could follow up, I'd appreciate that. Well, this is very concerning to me to hear about this proposal. While education improvement organizations do support certain innovative programs, they do not provide scholarships for students who are seeking a better education. While I understand that there's currently a waiting list for businesses seeking the tax credit, I think the most important thing that we're all forgetting is that there's 60,000 students who are waiting in line with their families to receive those tax credits to get an opportunity for a better education. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Salisbury.
Thank you, Chairman. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to tell you about a wild goose chase that I recently undertook. So I represent the 34th Legislative District in Allegheny County, and when people in my district came to me and said that they had been submitting fraud, waste, and abuse reports regarding my local school district, Woodland Hills, to the state for, in some cases, several years with no response, I felt that it was my job to do what my job title implies, which is represent those people in Harrisburg. And so I started reaching out because they were calling for an audit. So I reached out to what seemed natural to me, the Auditor General's office. I was then informed that in 2022, the Auditor General unilaterally declared that there would be no more school audits performed under the Auditor General's office. The 46 full-time auditors who were employed by the Bureau of School Audits would be let go. That entire department was going to be dissolved, and that the Department of Education should pick all of that up in order to save apparently $5 million. Apparently this was also news to the Department of Education, who said that they learned about it from the memo that was publicly released that day. So then the Department of Education also does not have a Bureau of School Audits. That was never created. So we are at a point now where the Bureau of Audits, which is under your auspices, has instituted an audit of my school district that is forthcoming. But I'm also given to understand that that's extremely unusual, that that's not really the normal way that a school audit would be done. I wonder if you can walk me through how are our 500-some school districts in Pennsylvania currently being audited if there are those fraud, waste, and abuse reports or other indicators of some sort of a potential financial issue.
Because schools receive federal funding, they are subject to federal single audits. And so there are federal auditing components that go into consideration with school districts. We have, to your point, we have started doing selective audits just based on our capacity and our ability to do those. Our audits, obviously we cover all agencies under the governor's jurisdiction with our Bureau of Audits. So there's a lot of potential audits to go around. But we have been increasing our staff within the Bureau of Audits to be able to try to take on some additional school audits. We work very closely with the Department of Education and identifying potential risks and factors that would otherwise open up the ability for us to perform performance audits on state dollars. So it's a management of resources, working and having good relationships with all 500 school districts and our collaborative process with the Department of Education.
So when I asked the Department of Education during their hearing how many sets of full-time eyes do they have on those fraud, waste, and abuse reports, I was told effectively zero. So in terms of looking at the staffing of the former Bureau of School Audits, who had, I'm told, once had as many as 120 full-time auditors, and then we're down to that 46 number when it was dissolved. Do you have staffing that would be comparable to the staffing that once existed before that 22 dissolution?
No, no. Our Bureau of Audits is not anywhere near the size and scope of what the Auditor General would have had in that. But again, we are building up our audit capacity as a result of conversations with the General Assembly and increased appropriations to the Office of the Budget. Obviously, we take all complaints of potential fraud, waste, and abuse very seriously. And our Bureau of Audits is committed to working with audited entities through the processes.
So when that $5 million savings occurred in the Auditor General's budget in order to dissolve the Bureau of School Audits, that $5 million was not transferred to the Bureau of Audits generally in order to compensate for that. Like, that did not get sent to some other auditing function that currently uses that money, correct?
I wouldn't say it was a direct transfer, but again, we have worked with the General Assembly on providing some additional resources to the Office of the Budget to help staff up for audits.
Not to the extent of $5 million, though.
I don't want to misquote a number. I can get back to you on what we've dedicated to increased money for that.
But you certainly don't have the 46 auditors in place that they once had.
Not specifically for school districts.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your responses.
Thank the gentlelady. Representative Krupa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I guess it's almost lunch at this point. I want to clarify before I ask a question, a point that was raised earlier. There are clear distinctions between cases that the Office of the Attorney General prosecute and those that the Office of General Counsel can prosecute, as outlined by the Attorney General at his budget hearing. At a time when OGC has nearly twice as many attorneys within their complement than the Attorney General, I really believe that any talk of transferring funds away from the Attorney General's office and the important work that they're doing is misguided. But my question specifically, or questions this morning, are about the Federal Response Fund. According to the governor's budget materials, this fund would be used to respond to any action or inaction by the federal government that results in the reduction in funding to programs impacting the health, safety, and welfare of Pennsylvanians. So my first question is very simple. What specific federal action or inaction is the governor anticipating that requires the creation of this fund? Is there a particular federal policy change, funding cut, or enforcement action that this proposal is meant to respond to?
So there have been several examples in which the administration had to provide assistance to Pennsylvanians as a result of action or inaction. I think the most glaring case was when there was a lapse in SNAP funding at the federal level, and Pennsylvanians were facing a hunger crisis. So the administration utilized dollars that would have otherwise been utilized by agencies for other purposes in what they were planned for to be able to react. So I think that is a prime example of what we would anticipate. As was mentioned, there were at least 20 instances where we've had to provide action against the federal government to ensure that the dollars that we were committed would actually been received here. The Federal Response Fund, I will say, is also not meant to be a complete coverage of any federal change. We recognize that any long-standing effects or impacts on the Commonwealth or its residents would need to be a collaborative conversation with the General Assembly on whether or not we continue those. But I think just an abrupt end to services that the Commonwealth residents have come to rely on is not helpful, and we need to, the proposal is there so that we can help lessen the burden.
My second concern is where the money is coming from. The Rainy Day Fund exists for genuine fiscal emergencies affecting the Commonwealth. It is meant to stabilize the budget during downturns, not to create a discretionary fund to respond to political disputes with Washington. Mr. Secretary, I think taxpayers deserve clarity here. Taking $100 million out of the Rainy Day Fund to create a broadly defined discretionary account without clear guide rails raises serious concerns about both fiscal discipline and whether those funds could be used to undermine legitimate federal law enforcement activities. That's something that many Pennsylvanians strongly oppose. So, Mr. Secretary, how does the governor justify pulling $100 million out of the rainy day fund for this purpose when the General Assembly already has the constitutional authority to appropriate funds if a true emergency arises?
Yeah, so there's a couple points in there. What we have seen is that we need to react faster than what the appropriations process could potentially take. I understand, given the severity of an emergency, there would be ongoing conversations of the reaction needed and the time that it would take to respond to that. As it relates to the rainy day funds, we are proposing a $100 million transfer out of that. I will say that the interest alone generated on the rainy day fund in fiscal year 24 was 3 times that, and it's 8 times that over the 3-year period under this administration. So I think the investments that have been made on that could potentially go to help mitigate any impacts from the federal government.
Finally, I want to address one last issue with respect to this. Across the country, we've seen some states and local governments attempt to use taxpayer resources to obstruct or interfere with federal immigration enforcement. I want to be very clear, interfering with legitimate operations of U.S. Immigrations and Custom Enforcement is not just a policy disagreement. It can create a serious national security risk. Federal immigration enforcement often targets individuals connected to violent criminal organizations, drug trafficking networks, and human trafficking operations. Taxpayer dollars from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania should never be used to undermine or obstruct those lawful federal operations. So my question is this: can you assure this committee that no funds from this proposed federal response fund would ever be used to interfere with, obstruct, or undermine legitimate ICE enforcement activities in Pennsylvania?
The creation of the fund would be subject to legislation, and I think that would all be part of an ongoing conversation with the General Assembly if there is an appetite to create the fund that we had proposed. I will also say that, as you likely heard from the Pennsylvania State Police and Department of Corrections, we work closely with our federal partners and abide by all state and federal laws.
Thank you, and I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank the gentlelady, Representative Friel.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to talk a little bit about some of the forecasts that we have in the future of the budget and revenue. I know that over the past couple of years, as that rainy day fund has been used to make up some gaps, and we've had some proposals for revenue and in the form of legalization of marijuana, skill games, closing the Delaware loophole. Had this body acted 3 years ago when these first proposals had gone, is it true that this budget would look different in terms of its dipping into the rainy day fund? Could you, in aggregate, tell us, had this body acted when they were first proposed, about how much money did we leave on the table as a body here?
Yeah, if we would have enacted it as we had proposed at the time of proposed, based on our assumptions at those times, it would be about $3 billion.
So about $3 billion that we've left on the table. And just to be clear, that $3 billion for things like skill games is taking a unregulated, untaxed industry and just bringing a degree of fairness and treating it like other industries, other similar industries within Pennsylvania. So right now they have a significant difference, a significant advantage versus other similar industries. Is that correct?
Yes, Pennsylvania has been, I think, a leader when it comes to regulation of gaming, a national leader among other states, and there have been models that have been modeled after the Commonwealth. The Gaming Control Board has the regulatory authority and the requirement, essentially, to make sure that all gaming is fair and equal. And also, when it comes to unregulated gaming versus regulated gaming, the regulated gaming industry allows for certain consumer protection qualities, and with the increase in gaming opportunities, there's always an increase in potential addiction or other concerns. So I think being able to ensure that everything is under the auspice of the Gaming Control Board is important in that aspect.
And I think that would be similar to, if we're talking about the legalization of marijuana, if we bring a black market that we all know exists today and under strict controls of the state, Then there'll be things like quality control, testing, safety. So not only is it a revenue potential source, but it is a public safety piece of legislation that we can put forward. Is that true?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Thank you. Moving on to healthcare and the future projections. I notice, the way we're budgeting, I know it's been characterized as we don't really budget, future, but that's not really how our budget is constructed. It's here's our budget proposal this year, and here's what our contractual obligations look like as our base upon which we're going to start our budgets year after year. Is that correct?
That is correct. We provide a budget proposal that provides for investments that we believe would continue to push our progress forward, and then that is the base that is used for future negotiations.
And I think it's been acknowledged on both sides. One of the biggest concerns that we have is the budget on DHS and education. As the federal government has proposed cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and we don't know what those rules look like, but we know it's coming, and it's billions of dollars that are going to be cut from our budget here in Pennsylvania in the future because of this. If we don't know exactly what that's going to do to our budget, but it's also going to have a significant impact on healthcare access in Pennsylvania unless this body acts. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are a number of changes that were enacted in H.R. 1 that will have an impact on access to Medicaid program as well as other benefits that our population utilize. And as I had said in a previous comment, there is also still time for Congress to make any kind of changes to that. While it is set to go into effect in 2028, there are a whole bunch of things in there that will ultimately have an impact to the access and the number of individuals that access health care in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. And I'll do one last question. Just go back to the previous questioning. We talked about the $100 million for the federal response. And I think there was a very critical statement there that my colleague made, and that's the legitimate law enforcement of the federal government. But that's really not what this is designed to do, because each of the 45, I believe, lawsuits that we filed against the federal government said this was an illegitimate act. This was an act either against constitutional law or against current federal statute, and we've won every single case. So really, if you look historically what Pennsylvania has done, we've challenged illegitimate acts by the federal government and been proven successful each and every time. Is that correct?
The suits that we had brought against the federal government as a direct reaction of resources that were already previously committed to the Commonwealth, of the ones that have been decided, they have been all ruled in our favor. That is correct.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank the gentleman. Representative Donahue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here today. Last year, the administration certified over $1 billion in property tax relief for the first time ever. What does that say about our Commonwealth, and how does that help everyday Pennsylvanians?
Yeah. So the $1 billion that we certified last year for the first time has put us at roughly $13 billion of property tax relief that we have provided since the inception of that program. Historically, the amount of money that was certified was around $595 million. That was for nearly a decade. And then 2022, we started increasing that just based on the available funds in the Property Tax Relief Fund to $750 million, and another $750 million the year after, $900 in 24, and then 25 was $1.025 billion. So we are again proposing to certify at least that amount, 1.025, and we'll continue to look at the fund to determine if the fund can sustain an increase. But overall, that is general property tax relief through farmstead, homestead, farmstead, and that goes directly to mitigate potential increases in property taxes for individuals.
Thank you for that. Just shifting gears a little bit to energy affordability. Energy prices are rising, and constituents are understandably concerned about the impacts on energy pricing and also the prevalence of data center proposals throughout the Commonwealth. Could you just discuss the importance of Pennsylvania's responsible infrastructure development proposal that the governor proposed in his budget address?
Yeah, again, we recognize that AI has future benefits to a variety of areas, and we have worked with potential growth of data centers and building of new data centers in the past. Under this administration, what we are proposing is to increase what we're proposing is to ensure that the future development of that, if they're going to benefit from a hands-on approach and ability of the administration to generate that growth, as well as future tax incentives that could otherwise be available to those developments. We want to make sure that we are hitting a group of standards to ensure that the people in those local areas are protected. We want to make sure that the environmental resources that are available to people in those areas are not impacted. We want to make sure that the local workers are utilized to develop that as well as operate those facilities. We want to make sure that the developers who are making those developments on those large centers, which utilize a lot of energy, are utilizing are bringing their own energy. And the reason for that is to make sure that the cost to local businesses and residents don't increase just as a result of that. And then also just want to make sure that the locals in the area are at least aware of the planned development and have some buy-in to the development.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, Representative Brennan.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you for being here today. It's been a pleasure working with your office and the governor's office. And for the last few years that I've been here, I've watched the governor. I often tell my constituents that he's the first governor in some time to have a business plan, probably decades, 3 decades, I think. And one of the things I'm also always concerned about is our infrastructure here in Pennsylvania. I've watched the sort of streamlined programs that have been developing, the sites plan. I've seen some of the successes with billions of dollars in investment coming here to Pennsylvania. But I'm wondering, I have a few questions about our infrastructure, and I see that the governor has proposed a new critical infrastructure investment program, which is intended to include housing, energy, school districts, local government. Can you tell us a little bit about this program and share how that's intended to function?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you touched on it, and you heard the governor say in his proposal that affordability is important, and one way to tackle affordability is to ensure supply. So the intent of the critical infrastructure program would be to create the program, solicit applications for projects, whether that be in development of new housing. It also depends on how it's structured, on what the uses could be. Since we're talking about bonds, if we're going to do non-taxable bonds, we have to make sure that it's in line with eligible uses for non-taxable. If we go with a taxable direction, that opens up for other potential uses. But I think just in general in the housing space, creation of new housing, rehabilitation of existing housing, are all important. In the energy space, touched on a little bit too, just making sure that we have resources available to pair with our changes that we've made in the permitting process and making Pennsylvania just a more attractive place to do business, and need for energy as a part of that process. In the school facilities side, we've made great strides in working with the General Assembly and investing around $400 million in the last few years in infrastructure updates to our school facilities, but we've also heard that the need for those school facility improvements are in the billions. So we are proposing this fund really as a holistic approach to make sure that Pennsylvania remains competitive, and so that we can have safe places for our schools and our children, who are the future of our workforce, safe housing and affordable housing, who are the existing workforce, and the ability to attract new workers here, and energy to heat the homes and the businesses which is all in concert with working towards our goals in the economic development strategy that we outlined.
And I do believe we in this chamber really have to consider the need to build up our infrastructure, to protect our infrastructure. I'm hearing from my business leaders that we are seeing limitations. I know I've had conversations with some of my colleagues about closing the Delaware loophole and how that could, I mean, we have a program, it's a passive benefit. It favors out-of-state companies at the expense of Pennsylvania companies. And we're also falling behind in this infrastructure improvement when we could be putting up to $500 million a year into our infrastructure or other programs in Pennsylvania. So I do think we have to continually consider the need to keep that infrastructure together and how it interacts with our business development. One other question I had is we've seen a lot of uncertainty at the federal level with our institutions that do research. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how these decreases in funding impact some of our education institutes here in Pennsylvania? And is there anything that we can do as a body or that we should do to provide more stability for these institutions?
Yeah, so I will say some of the existing investments that we've made, there are some dollars which would never make up the amount of money potentially lost through the NIST funding at the federal level. But we've made some investments in biotech, specifically in the Department of Health. We've made some investments in neurodegenerative research, which certainly would never fill the gap, but critically important. And as part of our overall economic development strategy, have really been trying to focus on innovation in the life sciences and other industries in that areas. We certainly have good working relationships with our universities throughout the Commonwealth, and I think the Commonwealth as a whole would benefit from the level of innovation investments that we've called for through the Innovate in PA 2.0 program that we had proposed in our budget.
And thank you so much. We're certainly seeing the benefits of all that planning and investment. Thank you.
Chairman Struzzi.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. So the proposal before us that the governor put forth in February is a spend of just above $53 billion. Revenues, based on current estimates, are expected to be around $47 billion, give or take. The governor is proposing to balance this budget, drawing down the rainy day fund by about $4.5 billion, draining our surplus, and then proposing these new revenue sources that we've heard discussed today, regulating and taxing skill games, legalizing and taxing recreational marijuana, and increasing the minimum wage, which have been around, as was noted, for several years now. Those are not currently in place, so they are speculative revenues at best. But we do know that the governor, with the rainy day fund and draining the surplus, will essentially put us in a more difficult fiscal position in the outlying years. Now, as you had stated, currently, as you have met with the bond rating specialist, we are okay because we are able to pass a balanced budget, which we have done the past 3 years since the Shapiro administration took office by utilizing other funds, by draining our surplus. But if we continue down this path, we won't be able to do that, correct?
So we had put forward revenues to help mitigate any potential need to draw down surplus. As I had mentioned in the past, in past testimony here, we believe we have left about $3 billion off the table. While these are speculative, all revenue sources in the Commonwealth at one point were not in existence and were speculative at one point. So I think it's a negotiation process and work with the General Assembly on enacting revenue sources to continue to make the investments in Pennsylvania.
I think that's a little bit of a stretch. We know the revenue sources that we have right now in front of us, and to deal in hypotheticals, I think, isn't being responsible with the taxpayers of this Commonwealth. So I think you understand our concern, though, because we do have a good credit rating now, because we have that money in the bank, if you will, and then projecting just a 0.8% growth in expenditures over the outlying years really, I think, is misleading to the taxpayers of this Commonwealth, because once the rainy day fund is gone, once the surplus is gone, where do those funds come from if we don't have the revenues to meet the required spend?
The Constitution says that we have to propose a balanced budget with expenditures and revenues in line, and if the expenditures outgrow the the available revenues, then we have to propose new revenues, which is what we've done for the last 4 years. So I think we will continue to seek common sense policy changes that would generate revenues and allow us to continue to make investments in the people of Pennsylvania.
And if those revenues aren't there, where does the funding come from?
That would be an enacted product is subject to negotiations with the General Assembly on what a balanced budget looks like at enactment.
Again, where do the revenues for this Commonwealth come from?
Current revenues come from a variety of sources. They come from taxes, they come from fees, they come from other federal sources. There's a large variety of revenue sources, and at one point, the revenue sources of this Commonwealth were not in place. At one point, they were all speculative, is what that's what I meant by that statement. So they are all part of proposals and all part of open and constructive conversations with the General Assembly on the best ways to continue to make investments in the people of Pennsylvania.
But essentially, if those speculative revenues aren't in place, ultimately, it's going to fall on the taxpayers to make up that gap.
Ultimately, it would fall to the General Assembly to enact a budget in concert with the administration on what a balanced budget would look like, whether it's new revenues or decreased spending.
Okay. You're very good at walking around the answers.
That is the answer.
Just out of curiosity, how do you determine what amounts you put in the line items? Because throughout these 3 weeks of hearings, you know, we've had various agencies before us who have requested certain amounts but not received those amounts, or conversely, they've been given more than they asked for. How are those determined?
So we solicit through our budget instructions in August to agencies what a cost to carry budget would look like. They provide the submission in October to the Governor's Budget Office outlining the operational dollars or the personnel figures that they believe would be necessary to continue to operate. What we do in the Office of the Budget is scrutinize every line in appropriation when it comes to personnel. We look at existing vacancies and how long those vacancies have been unfilled. We apply certain criteria to the number of pays that we believe that should that vacancy be filled in the proposed fiscal year, how much time we think it would take, and we generally try to apply a standard across all personnel. When we look at all personnel across all agencies, regardless of governor's jurisdiction or not. Then what we do is we have obvious policy priorities that we review in concert with the governor, and that is what ultimately makes the proposal. We work very closely across policy and budget to ensure that the proposal that we're putting forward is that builds on our previous investments and continues to move the Commonwealth forward. So there are ongoing conversations with agencies on their budget submissions, and ultimately we make the final proposal in February.
And just one last question to kind of sum it up. Do you start with a number, or do you just build to that number? And do you look at current revenues, or is that just, you know, again, hypothetical, we're just going to put the number out there and then figure out how to get there?
No. So we build a budget based on what we believe is the best use of taxpayer dollars and investments in the Commonwealth, and then it all coordinates together on the revenues that would be needed to make those investments, which is how we came up with the revenue proposals that we did.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Secretary, thank you again for being here. Just a few questions before we wrap up. A lot of comments have been made about the speculative nature of the budget. Would you say that budgets in government, to a sense, are speculative or an educated guess in many ways?
We are required to put forward a budget proposal, and it is exactly that, a proposal on what we would recommend that the General Assembly appropriates for specific programs, as well as the revenues that would be needed to cover those programs. And it is up to a good, negotiation process with the General Assembly on shared priorities in what a final negotiated product looks like.
I agree and understand that, but even on our documents, when we're looking at it, it says estimated, typically with revenue, correct?
Yes.
And so would you agree that it is an educated guess on what we believe those revenues would be?
Yes, there is a process that is undertaken with the Governor's Budget Office and the Department of Revenue looking at economic factors and growth trends of business taxes, and that is how our revenue estimate is. Exactly that, an estimate is determined.
So it's an estimate?
Yes.
Okay. So when we do our estimates, would you say our estimates are conservative, moderate, or more aggressive in our estimation?
Our revenue estimates are conservative. Over a 25-year period, the actual revenue growth of the Commonwealth has been about 3.5%. The certified amount for fiscal year 25 was about 2.9%, and the adjusted revenue estimate that we are proposing for fiscal year 25 would be about 3.5%. So we were under estimate. We're adjusting our estimate. And the overall estimate for base revenues for fiscal year 2026 is about 3.1%. So we are under, or 2.1%, I'm sorry. So we are under, well under where the historical trends have been.
Right now, year to date, how are we on our revenue estimates? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Where are we?
We are, last I checked, 1.4% ahead of where we expected to be.
Dollars and cents for all of us who don't do this every.
I think it's about 200 million.
So
244.
We are 200 and something million ahead of what we were estimated to be at this point.
That is correct. We're increasing our estimate 244 million, but we are about 300 million ahead. Sorry, I got the numbers wrong.
So if I'm looking at the numbers that you all provide, you know, my staff gives me an update every month on where we are. It looks like year to date, we are about $381 million ahead of where we estimated. Correct. Does that seem like a good, right range of numbers?
Yeah. So we, I think as Secretary Brown had estimated, we try to be plus or minus 2%. We are closer year to date to 2% over where we had estimated, 380, and we are adjusting our revenue estimate up from what we certified as a result of our economic growth.
So to the person sitting at home, that means that when we did our budget estimates and what we talked about what we thought we would get in as a Commonwealth, because these are estimates, the actual realization is that we underestimated what we thought we would bring in, and that we've brought in almost $400 million more year to date than we thought we were going to have. Is that a fair assessment?
That is correct.
What are some of our big collection months in our yearly cycle? What are those months?
April, obviously, is personal income tax. March is typically the corporate net income tax. So we have our biggest revenue generating months ahead of us yet.
Wait, so let me get this again. So we're already almost $400 million ahead of what we estimated, and we've yet to get to the larger months in our fiscal cycle where we typically collect more revenue. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Okay. So I want folks to understand at home. One, this administration has a conservative view of how we estimate what our revenue is going to be. That means if you're sitting at home and you're thinking about how much money you're going to bring in the month of January, February to your own personal income, that means that the Commonwealth does the same thing. And what we've done over the last few months is that we have thought that we would bring in less money, and we're actually bringing in more. So much so that it's almost $400 million more than we thought we'd bring in. And for the folks sitting at home, we've yet to hit, I think what folks in track and field will say, we've yet to hit our stride with regards to the months that we actually collect a significant amount of our money in our fiscal year. Would that be an accurate summation?
That is correct.
Okay. So we're $400 million over where we thought we'd be. We're in March now, so that's when the businesses pay their taxes. And then April is when everyone else typically pays. So those are our 2 big months where we'll probably, because we're conservative in our estimation, we'll probably get even more ahead on how much money we're bringing in based off of what we thought we would bring in. And so I think it's interesting. I mean, we've sat here for weeks and we've heard people say all these different things going back and forth, but it comes down to the numbers. You're the budget secretary. It's about the numbers to you, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so we're ahead of the game with our revenue, and we still haven't hit the months where the revenue comes in. We're ahead of the game with regards to our credit rating, our bond rating, which is, you know, for the people sitting at home, it's basically the state's credit score. And just like you, at home, if you have a decent credit score, when you go out and try to borrow money or buy a car or buy a house, you get a better interest rate. Well, for the state, when we have a better bond rating, that means that when we go out to the market to bond, we get a cheaper interest rate. A cheaper interest rate on our bonds means that the debt service, which is the money that we have to pay back, which is your taxpayer dollars, that means we're paying back less in interest because we're good fiscal stewards. Correct?
Correct.
So when we have a budget impasse, right, could that possibly hurt our bond rating?
Yes.
And so when there are folks in this building who are okay with us holding up the budget, they are possibly holding our bond rating in limbo, correct?
Essentially, yes.
So a drop in our bond rating would also mean that we would be paying more interest when we go out and we bond and when we, the state, borrow money, correct?
Correct.
Who pays the difference in that interest? If there's more interest that has to be paid, where does that money come from?
All debt service is paid out of the general fund, which is current revenues, tax dollars.
Taxpayer dollars, correct? Correct. Okay. Now, my last point. In the budget, there are revenue generators, skill gains, legalization of adult use cannabis, raising the minimum wage. If those things don't happen, and we don't generate that revenue, what do we have to do with this budget proposal?
We would either have to utilize more of the rainy day fund or surplus, or would have to make difficult decisions on what our expenditure levels would look like.
Wait, you know, difficult decision. That sounds like a good political term. What does that actually mean? We'd have to make difficult decisions. In layman's terms.
We would have to look at every appropriation that is appropriated out of the general fund and make decisions on each of those lines. Any kind of reduction in those lines would have impacts on programs or services or personnel of the administration.
Reductions, does that mean cut?
Yes.
Okay. So let me give this in layman's terms. For the people sitting at home, I want them to understand what we're doing here. So if these revenue generators don't happen, right, we'll either have to take more money out of the rainy day fund, which some of my colleagues don't want to do, fine, or we'd have to cut services. So that means stuff like cutting money to our schools, correct?
Correct.
Cutting money to the Department of Human Services, correct?
Correct.
So that means cutting more money from, let's say, rural hospitals, correct?
Correct.
Cutting money to intellectual disabilities. That's a part of DHS, right?
It is.
Okay. So we would have to go through the budget and see all of these things that we're willing to cut. Last question. Have you received another or a counter budget proposal than to what the governor has proposed?
Not to date, no.
So no one who has criticized the budget has authored their own budget proposal to the governor or to the budget secretary?
No.
Okay. Listen, over the last 3 weeks, we've been critical. Many folks in this chamber have been critical, but this is now the time to help. You know, we have a gap to fill, and if you don't like taking money from the rainy day fund, that's fine. But you have to show us how you balance this budget without cutting services and programs to our constituents. If you don't like the governor's budget proposed revenues, show us how you'd like to generate more revenue. If you don't like what we're doing to generate funds, you have to show us what you would like to cut. We've been critical. But as these hearings begin to come to an end, it's now time to put up. It's easy to be critical without giving a solution. I've heard a lot of complaints about our 5-year projections, but I don't think I've seen even a 1-year budget proposal from anyone else who has criticized this budget. So if you're going to complain, that's fine, but complain with a purpose. And complain with a proposal. Because the truth of the matter is that we have a budget proposal in front of us. It is balanced. It calls on us to raise the minimum wage, to regulate skill gains, which are already happening here, and to legalize adult use cannabis. That's fine. If you don't support adult use cannabis, fine. Where are we going to find the money that is necessary to fill the gap in our budget? And if you don't think we should fill the gap, that's fine too. Give me your list of things to cut. Because that is the reality. There is no way around it. There's no, nice bow to put on it. Either we fund the things in the budget proposal or we start talking about where we're cutting. And so I submit to you, as we begin, we got one more hearing this afternoon, but as we begin to leave this building, if you don't agree with this, fine. Start to have the community meetings in your district and start to prepare your constituents for the lack of money coming for rural hospitals, or the lack of money coming for their school districts, or the lack of money coming for those nursing homes, or the lack of money that's coming for those roads or bridges, or the lack of money that's coming to make sure you have clean water, or the lack of money that's coming to make sure that you have clean air, or the lack of money that's coming for our adult programs, or the lack of money that's coming for our folks who are struggling with addiction. Set up the community meetings and the town halls and begin to prepare your constituents for the lack of resources that are coming. And then I want you to tell them to couple that with what the federal government is already doing. So not only will the federal government not be there for them, but the state government won't be there for them either. This is not a game. We can give cute sound bites all we want, but now the real work begins. If you don't want to fund it, what you going to cut? It's really that simple. If you feel like we can't afford it, fine. Give me your list of cuts. You know where my office is. You know my staff. We'll be happy to take your list of cuts. But don't do it quietly. The same way you proclaim in the rotunda is the same way I want you to proclaim those cuts in the rotunda. Because the people of the Commonwealth deserve to know, if we don't think we can do this, they deserve to know what we're willing to cut. And with that, I will conclude this budget hearing and thank the Secretary for being here with us. We will be back this afternoon at 1:15 with the Department of Health and DDAP. Until then, this budget hearing is adjourned.